Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our very first Manufacturing Minute podcast. I'm really excited that we've finally gotten to this point and we can kick off this Manufacturing Minute podcast series. So as an introduction, I'm Megan Meador. I'm an audit and assurance partner here at Brown Edwards, and I'm the manufacturing and distribution industry leader for our firm. So the purpose of these podcasts is just to update you on the trends and the hot topics shaping the world of manufacturing. And today I am very excited to introduce our first guest, and that's Randy Loman with Lake Turn Automation. Hi, Randy.
Hey,
Welcome.
hey, Megan. Thank you so very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what Lake Turn Automation does?
Sure. I'd be glad to. Founded Lake Turn Automation a little over 4 years ago, and that was after spending about 2 decades in both operations and IT leadership. So having been on both sides of the fence, I saw how overworked IT teams were. I've been in many of ERP implementation meetings where they've said, "Oh, just get the big fish in the net. We'll go back and get the smaller fish later." Well, guess what? We never were able to go back and get the smaller fish, and those left pain points that I call piranhas, right? Those are tiny process gaps that eat finance and operations teams alive every week, slowly draining productivity and negatively impacting morale. But the good news is, about 4 years ago, I stumbled across AI and automation, and that lets us close those gaps. So teams can now focus on their highest value work, things like creativity, problem solving, and purpose, things that we want to get out of bed and come to work for, right? So instead of doing the repetitive and the mundane, AI and automation handles that so that we can focus on what matters most. And to me, that's exciting, and that's what gets me out of bed every morning. And honestly, while we're on the topic of AI, we were using AI before AI was cool, before ChatGPT was in the headlines, because we noticed early that this technology could really transform how back office operations and finance teams operate.
Yeah, AI is the buzzword of the year. It seems like we've been hearing about AI. Every conference that I go to is about AI. There's an AI topic or subtopic. And so, what exactly is AI, Randy, in plain English, and how is it different from the automation that the finance teams have used for years?
Yeah, that's a great question. To your point, I think a lot of folks are getting AI fatigue, if you will. Certainly a lot of hype and a lot of things coming at folks. It's helpful sometimes to just back up and talk about what it is and then build from there. I think when people hear about AI, a lot of times, I don't want to date myself, but they think about the Terminator movie with robots that think like humans are going to take over the world. But in plain terms, certainly in our world, AI is software that can recognize patterns, make predictions, and learn from data. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's kind of boring. Traditional automation, like Excel macros, which a lot of folks on the listening today probably use, or robotic process automation, which we utilize quite a bit, also known as RPA, that follows strict rules. So if A, then B, else C. It does exactly what you tell it to do, just like an Excel spreadsheet or an Excel macro. But AI has come along, and that is a game changer because it can adapt. It can look at something and interpret context. And more importantly, it can improve with experience. It can train itself, much like an employee would. So I think of it this way, a rule-based bot stops cold, say for an example, when an invoice doesn't match a template. Oh, wait a minute, something new is on here I haven't seen before. And something we're seeing with a lot of our clients now, speaking of invoices, is tariffs. But if you have an AI-enabled system, it looks at that, it understands, oh, we have a new charge, it's a tariff, what do I need to do with this? So, it can look at history, it can recognize patterns, and still route it correctly. I think, we're seeing AI automations we're utilizing for invoicing, looking at tariffs today, and it's saying, oh, okay, I see a tariff. What have we done in the past with this vendor? Or what are thresholds we use for other vendors? Oh, wait, let me get a human in the loop. We'll need to get approval for this. So in the old days of 24 months ago, an automation would break and run off the tracks. Today, it can self-heal and move forward appropriately. And this is a big shift. I mean, it's a shift from digital data entry clerks, which was a big deal, to now digital analysts, which can make decisions. And that flexibility is what really makes AI such a big leap for finance teams and back office automation.
You're exactly right. I mean, AI is such a hot topic. And what has changed recently? I know you talked about that, ChatGPT and AI bots can be more adaptive, but what makes it really relevant for our leaders out there in the finance world?
Yeah, that's a big question I hear. I think it's two shifts that have kind of collided. I guess the first is the technology has matured. So the computer hardware and the models, I mean, they're now affordable and accessible through tools like Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT Enterprise. They're also transitioning from large learning models to large reasoning models. So now they can make decisions and analyze complex scenarios. And then, as the technology is peaking, so is the pressure on finance professionals, right, to do more with less, faster turnaround times, and in a similar vein, it's super hard to find finance professionals today. So a lot of times you're doing more with fewer resources because it's hard to get find finance professionals. So one of the most practical ways to address those gaps and gain the edge is tackle that balancing act using AI. I saw McKinsey had a study that estimated that roughly half of the FP&A activities currently in use could be automated. But another study just came out a few weeks ago that says fewer than a third of CFOs have actually met that threshold. So that's a huge gap, but it's a huge opportunity, a huge opportunity to save time, reduce manual work, and make smarter data-driven decisions. So I guess in short, I would say the capability has caught up to necessity. And, that in a nutshell is kind of why every boardroom everywhere is now talking about AI right now.
So let's get into the nitty gritty of what you're heading, talking about and heading towards here. Where is it making an impact now already in finance and back office operations? Can you give us some good examples?
Sure, sure. We're seeing that quite a bit. AI is already doing a lot of real work and heavy lifting, but as always in the case of back office and finance operations, it's sometimes behind the scenes. So, our firm's been doing an extended LinkedIn series here the past 8 or 9 weeks on AI agents, and that highlights how AI is quietly putting business processes on autopilot in all types of organizations. So, some examples of that in the finance arena, expense systems that are flagging anomalies that, you used to have to spend a lot of manual time trying to resolve. Certainly banking portals that detect fraud over millions of transactions, and then just basic blocking and tackling. Excel Copilot, certainly not where we want it to be, but it's made great progress in summarizing trends and providing formulas and daily benefits in very small ways. So these are all examples of AI that, finance teams may already be using. But, organizationally in finance, we see the biggest wins are in accounts payable. There's always a lot of paper pushing and a lot of labor in AP that is ripe for automation and AI. Also, you get over in the world of Excel that finance pros love. You've got reconciliations, you've got forecasting. AI can be utilized for all of those. I talked about it from an invoicing perspective. And in the old days, you had to use OCR and say, your invoice number is always at row 3, position 4. Well, AI can now dynamically read and understand invoices without having to go through all that. It can match them to POs. It can spot unusual transactions in second. It can monitor for tariffs. And then on the FP&A side, we're seeing teams use AI tools for scenario planning and variance analysis. That really helps improve decision making on the fly. Again, back to the do more with less and do it faster, by the way. And then, continuing on into the back office realm, HR is starting to use HR bots to answer policy questions. We're seeing 25 to 30% reduction in time spent just answering repetitive. I think operations teams we're seeing it use AI to do predictive models for scheduling or machine maintenance that's saving a lot of time. So it's not as flashy as some of the front office or some of the glitzy things you see, but in the back office world, it's quietly being utilized to really solve a lot of manual, repetitive pain points that back office folks run into day in and day out.
I think I sent you an email there last week. I have a client who just recently started using AI for some of their logistical planning and execution tasks, and they are very pleased with those outcomes. But, it's a shift in mindset, right? It's a new thing that everybody's trying to tackle and understand. And it's different from what we're all used to. We're regimented accountants. We like to be able to just go to our spreadsheet and do our thing. And to think that there's some kind of AI bot or something running in the background is scary for us accountants. We're typically rule followers and don't like to break the rules.
No, I agree. And, a common thread that I say all the time is AI doesn't replace people, it amplifies them. It takes that repetitive task off their plates so they can focus on innovation, problem solving, and analysis. All things that AI can't do and that humans like to do. So, that's a win-win in my book.
Absolutely. So if I'm a CFO or I'm a controller and I'm listening to this podcast and I think okay, well, what Randy is talking about today is pretty cool. It's intriguing me. What's a way that I could experiment with that, or a safe first step to try this out?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I think you used
Sorry. Yeah.
AI and safe in the same sentence. So, yes, there are many landmines out there. So, to someone who's in the trenches and sees and talks with a lot of folks, I would say the following. First and foremost, start small and start where you already are. A lot of folks want to jump into the deep end of the pool and, boil the ocean or start with the biggest, hairiest process they have. Don't do that. Start small. For example, we talked about you could start with tools like Microsoft Copilot, not perfect, but getting better. It's now embedded in Excel and Outlook. They're great first steps because they already operate inside your existing security framework. And, there's training and tools around all that, but, to take a quick break from all the AI hype, I'd like to remind finance folks that not every task requires AI. You want to use the most cost-effective solution you can to meet the objectives you're trying to meet. So there are many repetitive rule-based processes in the finance world, like recons, report generation, AP triage. There's all kinds of things that can be automated with simple RPA or workflow tools. And we've seen that, workflow automation and RPA are the great stepping stones to before you layer in artificial intelligence, because they carry minimal risk and they build confidence across the team on how, automation and AI, it's not going to replace what I do. It's going to augment, my capabilities and what I'm able to get done during the day. Now, when you do test AI, I would encourage you to pick a well-defined use case. Again, something that's small, that's clearly defined, and most importantly, has clean data, digitized data. Finance is pretty good about having clean data, but in some current cases, maybe not so much. So some possible examples around that we kind of talked about a moment ago, or hey, let's use AI to summarize some monthly results, or do some spend categorization, or maybe generating a first draft for a variance analysis or an explanation. But regardless of what you do and how you do it, you want to set up success factors up front, ROIs. And the good thing is, finance folks love ROIs. So, most folks go to how much time is it going to save, or, risk reduction, error reduction. Put numbers on that and measure it. Measure it during and after, and iterate and repeat. And then finally, a good suggestion that everybody is doing is build, you call it what you want. Say, I like to call it an AI council. And that's where you would get curious team members together to explore, stay safe, teach each other, and experiment. Getting a team together to roll up their sleeves is going to do more than months of planning ever will.
So, Randy, as we're thinking about starting to implement some AI tools in our back office functions, what risks should our leaders keep in mind as their teams start to use AI, especially when you think about sensitive data that may be privy?
Yeah, that's a great question. And contrary to what most folks would believe, the biggest risk isn't necessarily the technology, it's uninformed use. And there's a term called shadow AI, and that's a real problem within organizations. And that happens typically in the Wild West type of an organization without guidelines or policies. and employees, they're going to use the free consumer tools, the consumer GPT or the consumer Claude, and they're going to accidentally share sensitive data. And, if that includes financials or payroll, that's huge because that could trigger a breach reporting rule incident and all kinds of trouble. So that's why it's imperative for every organization to get a clear AI usage policy in place. And surprisingly, I go around and talk to folks quite a bit, and I'd say maybe 30 to 35% of organizations have a use policy in place. So once you get the use policy in place, then you're really going to want to need to get together an approved vendor list, a list of white-listed list of approved vendors that folks can use. So, for example, I think OpenAI Business or Enterprise is a pretty good solution. So land on a solution, get it documented, get it out to your teams. If you don't give them a solution, they're going to use it on their phone or wherever it might be. And then most importantly, then follow that up with team training, not only on the technology, but also on sensitivity and those type things. So every employee should know which tools are safe, which tools do I have to use, which tools and data are off limits, and when I do need to handle sensitive data, how do I do that? And, as we talk to folks, the data piece is probably the biggest rub. That's where most of the questions arise. And, there aren't any perfect right or wrong answers, but we typically like to categorize data in 3 different flavors: green, yellow, and red when using AI. And all of these, when I say use AI, I'm not saying use the free ChatGPT or Gemini. I'm saying use business grade AI. So use Copilot or use the OpenAI Business or Enterprise. And I think Claude has a Teams version as well. So green data, that's safe for use. It's probably the bulk of what you would use AI for. That's PDFs and case studies and templates and policies, or asking questions about GAAP or finance process improvement. That's all green light stuff, generally available information. But where you starts to, especially for finance, is you get into the yellow, and that's going to need to have guardrails, because folks immediately say, yeah, that was great, I can ask it questions, but I want it to look at our contracts or my client's financials or this proposal we're sending to a prospect. You can do that, certainly use enterprise tools, and then what we would typically recommend is sanitize out all the identifiable information. You can run financials in, take off Acme Company Incorporated at the top or whatever it might be, and run it through and put it back when you're done with it. So that, with some controls and, the right guidance, yellow's good. Then you get into red, and that's off limits to any of the enterprise models, regardless of what tier you subscribe to. And that's any PII information, which would include personal identifiers, think W-2s, pay stubs, bank numbers, privileged information, confidential information. You really need to keep that in-house. Now to run AI over those type documents, you're going to need a custom AI solution, and that can be stood up in Microsoft, very secure, even HIPAA compliant, but that's going to require an IT team or a firm like ours to build out for you. And then, there's 2 more risks. The second major risk is over trusting the output. AI can sound really confident when it gives you that answer, but still be wrong. I just saw a ChatGPT. They have a new training testing criteria they use, and just last week they say it between 18 and 20% of the time it's still wrong. So you really have to verify the results. It requires a human in the loop. Don't blindly trust it, right? Trust but verify. And then last but not least, there's a cultural risk. I've seen 2 ends of the spectrum. They're banning AI. We don't allow it. Well, okay, well, that's just going to drive it underground, and folks are going to use the tools we talked about. The other end of the spectrum, and we don't care about it and let it run wild, and that promotes shadow IT, and that's equally risky. The right answer is right in the middle. Have structure, have clear policies, have approved tools and training. And, if you can use AI responsibly, you can really harness it from a liability into a true competitive advantage. And that's going to be key for all organizations as they move forward here in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely. I know at Brown Edwards, when we think about using AI, we are very, very conscientious of all the client information that we have out there,
Sure.
and try to train on not only ourselves, but our young folks, to make sure that whatever they're putting into those bots and into those chat windows, they're thoughtful about what's going in there, because once it's in there, right? It can't be undone. So we appreciate that. So, how can finance leaders separate hype from real business value when we're talking about vendors and their pitch with AI solutions?
Yeah, there's so much noise and so many pitches. It just seems like it's incessant day in, day out. And not only from new startups, but from the older enterprise solutions. So the good news is that's where finance pros shine, right? They're really good for asking for the numbers. The Missouri, the show me state. So, every AI proposal, anything you do with AI should answer three questions. What problem does it solve? How much time or money does it save? And how will we measure it? So if you can't answer those three things, then why are you doing it? We have some structured methodologies we use to help guide our clients when they try to put together, an AI framework. We have a strategy and a decision-making framework. From a strategy perspective, we encourage our clients to use four pillars. Vision, what's your vision for AI? Value, what value do you see in AI? What potential risks do you see in AI? And what's your comfort level with AI adoption? And all that should should mesh right into your strategic plan for your organization. Then when it comes down to making project decisions, we typically encourage folks to look at four evaluation filters. Impact, what's the impact to our organization? Lift in sales, reduction in operating expense. How feasible is this? Can our team handle that? What are the risks? Can we manage the risks of data getting out or what have you? And then last but not least, the cost. And you score your opportunities on those metrics. And if they don't score well, it's probably not worth pursuing. I mentioned at the start also that there's a lot of new AI vendors coming out. Seems like every day there's a new vendor with a new AI gizmo. You really have to be careful of some of those newer vendors because they operate too close to the blast zone of some of the open AI and some of the bigger vendors, and they either get taken out or become obsolete and vanish, or even worse, you don't know where your data goes. It's AI, right? So I would encourage folks to stick with established providers, the Oracles, the CCHs, the old school folks who might not get the glitzy features out as fast as some of the others, but certainly from a privacy and safety perspective, you're better off staying with someone with a proven track record. And then, I don't want to be gloom and doom on all this because, separating hype from value isn't about rejecting innovation. You really need to embrace it. It's more about discipline. So you need to have the strategy and the alignment and the impacts that come from trusted providers. And then, once you have all that in line, you can then start the journey to seeing real business value.
So, looking ahead, how should finance professionals prepare themselves for this new world and their teams to be an AI enabled future and to really reap the benefits of the opportunities that are there?
Yes, that's probably the second most frequent question we get. And, I always go back to, I think I mentioned it earlier, AI isn't replacing people, but it is redefining roles. You hear the old phrase, AI won't replace accountants, but accountants that use AI will. So I think, the finance professionals that will thrive are those who know how to pair their judgment. You talked about it, right? Debits and credits, and I know this field with this new breed of tools. So, AI tools don't come with user manuals, right? They're built with data scientists who may not understand business processes. So that creates a huge need for professionals who can bridge that gap. Those that understand, finance and the business and also understand the technology who can bridge the gap in between those. I mean, there'll be a huge demand for those resources for the next decade or more. And, all of that's a core strength for finance professionals, right? Analysis, control, precision. That forms a great foundation to stay focused on, where AI works and where AI doesn't, and stay the path of, attacking repetitive work so folks can do more advising, interpreting, and improving processes. Now, building AI literacy is key. And, it's funny, AI in an organization is a top-down initiative. It starts with the executive team and works its way down. It's not necessarily something that comes up from IT like a lot of technologies have done in the past. So you don't need data scientists everywhere, but you do need people who understand the technology and can use it responsibly and validate the results. So that's all about creating a learning culture Again, using small teams and pilots and sharing small wins. And last but not least, something you see unfortunately in a lot of organizations is culturally, you have to have a culture that's tolerant of innovation and failure. Especially in the accounting world, a lot of times, oh, this didn't balance, or failure equals bad. Many AI experiments you're going to get into won't work. But that's how learning happens. That's how you know what AI can and can't do, so you can make informed decisions or test it 12 months from now to see if it still breaks. So safe experimentation with guardrails is key. That builds confidence and capability. And I guess to close out, I would say that just remember, and it's hard for accountants per se, that everything has to balance. The goal isn't perfection, it's progress. So, I would encourage finance teams to ensure their people, give them the freedom to explore, learn, and adapt, because that's really what the future ready finance team is going to look like as we go forward into the next several years.
Right. It never hurts to share an idea or something that you would have about how AI could improve a process. You never know where that might end up. And I know, in accounting, you're right. A lot of people are concerned, is this going to replace my job? And I don't think any of us think that's the case. We still need accountants for years and years to come, right? AI just makes us do our job a little bit easier and lets us focus on the areas that we really should be focused on with human intervention.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Randy, we really appreciate you being a guest, our very first guest on the Manufacturing Minute, and we appreciate your time today.
It's been a pleasure to be here, Megan. Thank you so very much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Randy.